Do you think there is room for chivalry in the modern world? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, I think the word meant horsemanship, right?
Well, yeah, it comes from
But
that.
it meant knightly behavior. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
So the question is, what is a gentleman like? Is that right?
Yeah, because I don't think the chivalry referred to the fact that originally that might have been a warrior. I think it has to do with, putting down your coat over a mud puddle for a woman.
I'm not really talking about chivalry as it's been used in the last century in the gendered sense. I'm talking more about chivalry as in the medieval sense, more as a code of conduct. A code of conduct not just for the knights, but for all people, though of course people of higher stations tended to adhere to stricter forms of it. That's what I mean, because now it seems like anything goes. And is there a room for a code of conduct, of holding yourself to a higher standard of respect and nobility, when it seems respect and nobility of that sort is no longer valued?
Yeah, well, it's a personal decision, because I don't think it can be a national or regional thing. I think part of chivalry is that people hold firm to what they think is the truth, too. And we don't have much of that. I could be wrong.
Yes, that's part of it, isn't it?
Well, it's my impression.
It goes with dependability and honor.
Yeah, dependability, honor, and consistency, probably. But yeah, well, I'd like there to be room for it. But as I say, I think it can only be implemented on a small scale right now.
So the question is there a place for a conduct of behavior that holds one to a standard?
Yeah. Nobility or dignity.
Well, certainly there is. Now the question is, what is that?
Yeah. Well, I think there are people in that category, whether they identify it as an ideology or a way of life, but you just don't see too many of them these days. Right. Not, in the public view anyway.
Well, it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. Oh, and MAGA people, the right wing, is wanting to censor books again, and they don't want anything taught that would make someone uncomfortable, as if learning is always comfortable. So, yeah. And they criticized the left for being snowflakes because they wanted to, create safe spaces and things like that. Now they have their own snowflakes. Yeah, DeSantis encourages parents to sue schools over critical race theory, without anyone ever knowing what that means. Just means if your kid learns something that makes you uncomfortable, then you report the teacher. That and the Texas abortion thing with the vigilante enforcement. I mean, you can see things moving in the direction of disorder. So, anyway, it is what it is.
Well, back to the question of chivalry. Chivalry would seem to require a code that comes from somewhere.
Yeah, got to be based on something.
Social agreement?
I think it has to be something vertical rather than horizontal. I don't know exactly what it has to be, but there are principles necessarily involved that you wouldn't violate, even if you were surrounded by people who didn't like it.
Principles. It's easy to try to look at this in high focus about what you would be willing to give up or not give up if the situation demanded it or if there was a lot of stress around it. But the other side of the question is a set of principles for living life. Yeah, it's to implement the principles. Not necessarily in court or public. And yes, there obviously is.
It's got to have some form of objectivity connected to it, or it will just drift anywhere it wants.
Yes, well, and then what about if those principles conflict with other people's principles?
Well, if they attack you, you have to defend yourself, but otherwise, why are you trying to please the others if they're not inclined to like what you are or what you do?
And I think in many ways, it's actually good to have conflicting principles because they serve as a benchmark for questioning those principles from now and again. Sometimes the principles get inherited and we forget about them, but it's only when they're conflicted do we question them.
Right, and you can't have a decent society if people can't have different points of view.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about uniformity. Uniformity is never really a good thing for a society.
Yeah, there's no critical thinking involved in uniformity.
Yeah, conformity is kind of a short-term solution.
Yeah, but some people are only focused on the short term or the shallow term.
Yes.
Some people need that, apparently, or think they do.
Advaita Vedanta, would you like to lead us along a little on this?
I think that we in the modern world have abandoned all principles, and it seems like the only principles we have are following whatever laws the government put down or whatever roles the corporation we happen to be involved with makes for us. And outside of that, it seems like anything goes, to the point that some of the younger people are expressly against, chivalric notions, that it's old-fashioned, that it's wrong.
And what are these notions that are wrong?
Like helping someone in need or showing, some sort of decency or respect to someone. I mean, when we started this question, you mentioned the gender chivalry, but, I know people that don't even want people of the same gender opening doors for them because they think it's offensive when it's just someone being polite. It's all about these people on this quest for the will to power and assertion of the ego. And when someone holds themselves to a personal standard, whether you call it chivalry or a code of honor or something else, it's saying that, my ego's not everything. I'm going to hold myself to these standards. And ideally, these standards are a training ground for a life leading towards God. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the notions of chivalry come from religious knights, religious warriors. You could, by a different name, some of the code laws of Manu and the way of life of the Kshatriya. I think all of us are warriors of some sort in our life. I mean, Sheikh al-Bashir, last session, you said all of us have to follow all of the yugas. And I think following some sort of principle like this and realizing that we all have to struggle, with the greater jihad in our daily lives means that setting ourselves some sort of principles to live by, something that we ideally won't break, is going to be helpful.
Should be.
Yes, and make life easier.
And it comes back to that quotation from Dostoevsky where he says, without God, all things are possible. And he doesn't mean it in a good way.
No, yes. If there's no God, then everything is permissible or everything is allowed.
Yes. All right. Anyway.
I was just going to say, obviously, I was impressed by that phrase. I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie and it was in there. And I thought, pay attention.
Well, I'll go on to the next question now. We talked a lot about theoretical things and a lot about practical matters, but have not talked a lot about how to balance those two sides of life. How do you balance the theoretical and practical sides of life and faith in your personal lives?
Well, can we go back to the point Greg often makes about at the level of practical reality, things that are required that you do, but you don't have to believe they're true?
Yeah, but you've noticed that it works better that way.
Yes, right.
Well, the theoretical things are nice, but they're not applied, and there are practical matters having to do with spiritual life too. So, I don't even like balancing them. As I just think they need to find their proper place in your life, or you need to shape your life to fit in the proper place with regard to those. Theoretical and faith. Of course, faith doesn't actually need any of the other two, theory and practice. But you do practice certain things and believe certain things because of the faith. But there's room for all of it. If it weren't necessary, it wouldn't be that way.
Well, so how do we use this? Recognize that there are theoretical things and practical things?
Yeah. I mean, it's like remembering that something that we take seriously may just be a concept. Be clear on what's theoretical and what you've tested in practice. And also, you can simply enjoy the theoretical side like one can enjoy metaphysics. But you can't practice metaphysics in your life.
Right. Is this the kind of thing you were talking about, Advaita Vedanta?
Sort of, but I was hoping more for practical instruction or advice to people tuning into this about how to actually join the two together. Some of what you're saying is still keeping them separated. A place for one and a place for other, but there's a reason for the word praxis. It's theory and practice together. And that's what our practice should be. It should be a praxis. And I have my own ideas about how to go about that, but I was wondering if you could provide any helpful advice.
Well, the theoretical side, as stated here, really provides a context in which the practical either is accomplished or is understood.
Yeah, understood especially.
Right. So by having a theoretical framework, one can practice in accordance with that, which will produce coherence in terms of one's actions over time. Now, that's not an absolute formulation, but I think that's the theory of praxis.
Personally, I think I would reverse it.
Okay.
And say that rather than basing the practice on the theory and having that foundation, I think that it's actually the theory that comes from directly lived experience.
Well, yes, but then in terms of explaining or articulating that experience, you need to call on some sort of conceptual framework.
Right, but that conceptual framework postdates the practice. First one experiences and does and lives and practices. And then if you experience that, then you try to put that in words and you build up these various edifices, some of which are more direct and simple and some of which are more complicated. And then here we are, all these millennia later, coming to this, and we reverse it and we're like, ooh, I want to experience something. So the first thing we do is run to doctrines and, start off with the most complicated because we think that's the best. And, think all these abstruse metaphysical arguments and everything are so wonderful and profound, but it's just layer upon layer of obfuscation of very simple, direct, intuitive experience that people used to experience directly without the intermediary of language or doctrine or anything else.
Well, the theory comes from experience, and if you would like to get closer to the experience, you might let the theory guide you a little, because not everybody starts out with a profound experience.
And if what you want is a profound experience, or richer experience, or more or varied experiences, it might be helpful to have some sort of theoretical framework that would help you discover the connections or margins or demarcations of
Right.
experience.
Yeah, you could think of it like there's a sage sitting in meditation and he has a giant realization, and he comes out of the monastery and walks down the road to share it. And people who hear it and think it's wonderful need to follow the reverse path to get to the original experience. In the case of the sage, the experience comes first, but in the case of somebody without the experience, the theory may come first.
Well, here's how I think about it. I think the great saints and sages, and sometimes just the simple religious believers, they've been told, let's say, here's a story, God is in New York, and all these people that are aspirants, they're in Baltimore. And the people that know what they're doing and actually achieve something in the religious life, they get on their bicycle and they start pedaling towards New York and they get to their God. On the other hand, what most of the people in the Tariqa have tended to do is they sit in Baltimore, and I'm just using Baltimore as an example. It's not meant to impact on any of the Baltimore Fuqara. They sit in Baltimore and they read all of the manuals of the theory of the bicycle and learn about how the bicycle works, but they never actually get on the bicycle and get to God.
Yeah, right. That's a danger.
Yeah.
Also a danger is trying your best to make a bicycle and not being able to get it together or really ride it or have any idea about how it works or where to ride it to. And that's the other side of the same problem.
Well, whatever the vehicle is, there's always someone who can't travel that way.
Fair enough.
There are people who never can seem to not be able to learn how to ride a bike. Not very many, but there are people like that.
And most people at least need some sort of beginner's manual so that they can stay upright at least.
Yeah, or, hands-on guidance of some kind.
Ideally.
But let's look at it also this way. Ultimately, practice in the truest sense is experience. And experience can never and should never be transcended, because even when one attains to unity with the divine, that itself is your experience. On the other hand, theory is just a ladder that one can and should discard and must discard when one gets to where they need to go at the top.
Yeah, ultimately, yes. If you reach the end, you don't need the theory.
Ultimately, theory is a tool and nothing but a tool, whereas experience is what is. Experience is the important thing.
Right. Well, even theory starts out as an experience. Well, I really like theory. You know, sometimes it's beautiful the way mathematics are, but experience trumps theory if you're there for it.
Or would you say that Trump experiences theory?
Huh?
You said experience trumps theory, so I said, or would you say that Trump experiences theory?
I don't think Trump experiences anything that's abstract.
Good answer.
But can't we at least conclude that both experience and theory have their place?
Yes. And I think also, I was just going to say that, earlier we talked about conformity. And again, I think we're putting experience on the opposite spectrum of theory, which it doesn't have to be. For some, it works that way. For others, it doesn't. For some, things have to be experienced before understanding the doctrine or theory behind it. And for some, the doctrine has to come before the experience to be enriched with that theory.
Yeah, you have to start with a way of looking at things. And that even that theoretical looking occurs in experience. It's not like...
Well, it can also tell you where to look.
Well, yeah.
But even if you have theory, you still have to translate it into you reevaluating it and starting from the roots and the beginning and finding your own way of expressing it. Because ultimately, far too much of theory is people absorbing stuff that other people wrote or said, and then regurgitating it. And you have the danger there of then using that as a crutch that prevents you from experiencing, even in some of the simplest things.
Yeah.
All my life, from the time I was in kindergarten, I was told to use number 2 pencils. And then, many, many, many years later, I'm fed up with number 2 pencils and I try 4B pencils. And I realize all my life it's like the big lie that everyone says number 2 pencils are good, which are HB. And I realized that the much bolder and more pure graphite 4B are massively improved. But you know what? If I didn't get outside of that teaching, I would never experience that. And I'm just using this as the simplest thing. When you get into like issues of metaphysics and stuff, it's much more important. You need to test these things by your own experience, and you need to rediscover everything that someone like Ibn Arabi or someone else said. Otherwise, all the learning in the world is worthless.
Well, I think a lot of the number 2 pencil focus, by the way, is 4B softer and darker or harder and more silver?
4B is softer and darker.
I like softer myself.
4B is the softest and darkest that 0.5 leads will go to. And it's nice. It's such a smooth experience that you feel like you're writing with a fountain pen. It's great, yeah.
Yeah. Even 2B is a lot more that way than regular. But the emphasis on the number 2 pencil really comes when they started scanning tests. Use a number 2 pencil to fill in this little circle that shows your answer, because the scanner will be able to differentiate it from the surrounding surface. Because I kind of think that the pencil I used in first grade was softer than number 2. I might be remembering that wrong. That was a long time ago. Yeah, so I don't know.
Just anecdotally, Thoreau actually died at a very young age of a combination of the fact that he had tuberculosis and his family's business was running a pencil factory, and he actually invented a number of ingenious ways of basically mass producing pencils. So the common American woodcase pencil, the original patent for that goes back to Thoreau, but he would be in there when he wasn't in Walden Pond breathing in graphite dust, which wasn't good for his lung tuberculosis. But yeah, I mean, back in the day, there wasn't really such a thing as like the hard clay-y lead. It was all soft and dark.
As it should be.
As it should be. There's only one true way. All right, I can move on.
Yeah, let's go to cryopreservation.
Would you consider having yourself cryonically frozen so as to potentially be revived at a later date? Or do you feel that such a step shows a lack of faith in God?
Well, I guess that depends on why I would be doing it.
Yeah.
It sounds interesting. If it's a matter of finally defeating death, I think, no, that is a lack of faith.
Yeah. I think you should learn to accept death before you consider.
Yeah, that's well said.
And then you have to ask yourself, does it make any difference? I'm thinking of, I think it was a Rumi poem, or Rumi, or, well, whoever it was. You know, what if I had to cut off my head and hand it to you? What difference would it make? Something like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Rumi poem, but I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it probably is Rumi. But you know, I read that and I thought, huh? What do you mean, what difference does it make? But you know, there's a level from which you can ask that question. So it's like, what difference does it make if I die? And we don't know the answer, but practically speaking, because we don't know the answer, we can't know that it matters. I'm not opposed to it. You know, if I thought I was fully realized and was about to die and somebody said, hey, how would you like to climb into this cryonic chamber? You know, I don't think there'd be any harm in trying it out, because the worst that'll happen is you don't wake up. And that's going to happen eventually anyway.
Well, I also think our bodies might freeze, but the time doesn't freeze. And so I wouldn't want to skip all the experiences to a later date when I can have them all living in the moment that I'm living.
Are you talking about future experiences and living them now, or are you talking about, I didn't quite get that.
Yes, can we have that again?
Yes, so I said that, you know, our bodies might freeze, but time doesn't freeze. You know, time as a theoretical concept, it's always moving. So I would ask myself, why would I want to freeze myself instead of just dying naturally? And if I had the choice, for whatever reason, if I had to make that choice, then I wouldn't want to skip the experience that life is bringing to me in this very moment, and instead have it in the future when I'm defrosted.
Yeah, when you're defrosted, yeah.
Yeah.
But that which wakes up, if you can be revived, doesn't depend on time.
Exactly.
So either way, you end up with experience or not.
There was one of the horror movies from the 1980s where someone was frozen and then they were revived and their body was fine. And, you know, they found a cure for whatever it was that ailed them and their mind was fine, but their soul wasn't there. The soul went to the other place. And so this wonderful person that was frozen ended up waking up a sociopath.
Yeah, or a zombie.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, a sociopath, a mass murdering, you know, unfeeling person. And I think, you know, that sounds about right to me, but you know, I think Saida Zainab was sort of onto, you know, a certain way of looking at this. I would look at it more as like time doesn't move. Time is not real. Time is a construct that we in our bodies experience, but that actually has no existence for that which is. And so that which is now has always been and will always be so. And ultimately, the entire goal of being in this embodied life is to experience things. And there is a certain divine trajectory, a certain divine justice. And if, you know, sometimes great saints or sages pass away early, maybe that was their path to God. But ultimately, the longest and greatest journey that all of us have to face is the journey to that which lies beyond. And our entire path from the day we're born to the day we die should be a preparation for that longest journey. And giving up even a few hours in order to prematurely freeze ourselves seems like a waste of time that could be better devoted towards, you know, final rites or prayers or whatever else. And ultimately, if the point is to extend life and become immortal, whether you're going to download your brain into a computer system or have your head frozen or anything else, it's just a sign of egotism and hubris, because cannot escape these things. Even if you could turn yourself into some sort of genetically modified, part shark, part human, part robot that is able to outlive all of the beings on this planet and this planet itself, well, eventually you're going to have the sun going out. And let's say you live past that. Well, the universe is going to the great expansion and the great crunch. And eventually you're going to be crunched to death in the middle of the universe. You cannot run away from these things. And so the best thing you can do, whether it's now or 1,000 millennia from now, is to face it. Yeah. And I think, if you don't want to face it, that shows a fundamental lack of faith, and your time would be better spent, in meditation rather than preparation for these hubristic experiments.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Well, and there's that whole, fundamental thing about being identified with the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. There is that in there.
There is that. And if there's something after, then it doesn't matter if you leave what was. It's always going to be now. Time is the way we explain experience to ourselves, certain aspects of it. We never experience time directly.
No. What is there to experience?
Well, yeah, that's the point. Why should you take it to be real if you never experience it? But it seems necessary in order to explain certain things, but even there, we may be wrong about cause and effect. So it's of limited value. So I'm not going to go out looking for somebody who can cryogenically freeze me, and even if I knew that they weren't going to go out of business and I'd end up warming up and rotting anyway. And, people talk about being suspended there waiting for something to happen, which may take a long time, and a lot of things can change during that period. I mean, there could be an earthquake that, demolishes the building you're preserved in.
There could be a social movement that declares frozen people some sort of menace.
Yeah, or sacrilege.
But, it's not just that. Those are all worldly things to think about. But, like Dylan Thomas said, don't go gently into that good night. And what is a more gentle way of going into that good night than preempting death by having yourself gently frozen while under anesthetics, everything? No. You have to face things. You have to face problems and pain and illness. You have to face everything. That's one of the joys of life. It's experience. Even the final experience is an experience. And ultimately, the final experience for this embodied body is not the final experience as such.
Yes, but what we experience may change greatly. We don't know.
But that's as it should be. The people
that's the whole point.
Yeah, that's the whole point. The people and theologians that say that the next realm is simply going to be exactly the same as this realm, with everyone being like, having having wonderful tans and being 20-something good-looking people that lead the exact same lives as on this planet, but with like nothing but pleasure for all eternity. Oh God, what could be more boring than that?
Yeah, over eternity, it has a good chance of getting stale. Well, I think that's one of the benefits of facing your own mortality is learning to accept that you don't know. And that's a pretty big thing not to know, or so it seems.
Can I hear that again?
The acceptance of your mortality, it requires that you accept that you can't know what death is going to be.
I suppose that's true, yes.
Although, I don't know. If people believe they're going to see all their relatives in heaven, it may be harmless. And maybe if that's what they believe, they do experience something like that. Who knows?
Well, or if that particular belief helps them to finally see and experience that which is real.
Yes.
It has been of some value as a tool.
Yes. But the idea is that you will be rewarded, which I don't think is without meaning, but the way it's usually understood, I don't think that helps. Because you have an object that you desire, and acceptance of death is accepting that you don't know.
But it's also a clouded vision, because you don't need to wait to see your relatives. Everyone you've ever known and ever loved, whether they are alive or they've passed away, are still with you right here and now.
Yeah, but I'm not as aware of it.
You can be.
Well, I suppose. I mean, I'm aware that within my consciousness lived my deceased spouse.
I don't mean just within your consciousness. I mean,
What else?
in
There.
Yeah, exactly.
something that has existed must have existence, and it always was and always will be. That defining part of that individual is still there in some sort of different form.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about the ethereal, the soul, or you're talking just about the atoms and molecules that made them up, they're still there. They're still here with you. It might be hard to see that. It might be hard to have a conversation with the, but they're here. And, you know, one of the helpful ways of looking at this is Alfred North Whitehead's concept of objective immortality. And he said, if there's no other form of immortality, and he doesn't say that there's not, at the very least, there's a God, and God has experienced everything that ever was, is, or shall be. And so every person that has ever lived lives eternally in the mind of God.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's, you know, inherently limited, of course.
Yes.
But I think Whitehead was pretty smart.